Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Today, we are going to be doing part four of our writing. This is the part two of task two. Today, specifically, we are going to be talking about our task two writing, and we're going to be talking about how to write body paragraph one, two, and conclusion. Okay. In the last day, just a reminder what we learned, we talked about how to structure our introductions. Okay, how to structure our introductions. And we also talked about just a general overview as to what our task two overall should look like and the different types of essays that we could be asked to write. Okay, now all of them are very, very similar types to the point where we're not going to go over every single type because they are that similar, but we do go over a couple of different types of essays in that one as well and specific examples and all the types you could possibly receive. So, in general, let's review. This is from last day. In general, the general structure for writing task two is to write an introduction, which we already talked about how to do that last time, so in great detail. So, if you are unsure how to write a proper introduction, do make sure you go watch that because the introduction is a very key part to set us up for a strong paragraph one, two, and a strong conclusion. Okay, so make sure you watch that. Then paragraph one, paragraph two, and conclusion come after the introduction. And those are the three we're going to focus on for today. So, what is the structure for the main paragraphs, paragraph one and paragraph two? Well, the first thing is we need to give our reason for what we believe, okay, for our thesis statement and our opinion in paragraph or in the introduction paragraph. Then we need to expand on our reason. So give more of an expansion or more of an explanation as to why that's our reason, right? How does our reason actually relate to what we're arguing? Why is our reason relevant? Then we're going to give an example. Then we're going to connect our example to the reason and then also connect our example back to the thesis or our reason back to the thesis. Either one is fine, but we need to make sure in every body paragraph, in paragraph one and paragraph two, we're always keeping in mind that we need to connect it back to the thesis. And so if what you're writing about doesn't connect to your thesis, that means you either got to change your thesis or you've got to write something that's going to connect the thesis. Okay, and so having a good, strong introduction is going to be crucial for that because you don't want to write an entire paragraph and then realize, oh, wait, I'm not really connecting, this argument doesn't really connect to the thesis. You want to make sure from the beginning that your arguments are connected to your thesis so that this main body paragraph part will not be so bad. The main body paragraphs will be longer than the introduction. However, a lot of what you're doing for your main body paragraphs is really just expanding and going into more detail about what you said in your introduction. And so, in a way, a body paragraph, even though it's longer, might take only a little longer than the introduction, or might take about the same length of time that your introduction took, even because it's, it's a lot of it is stuff that you already know that you're just rephrasing, giving an example and an explanation, and then connecting it back to your original thesis. So I'm going to give an example. So let's actually revisit this example topic and introduction one. This is one that we specifically went into detail about in our last lecture. And this prompt says, is it good for young adults age 18 to 25 to continue living with their parents without paying rent? Discuss the advantages and disadvantages. So that was the prompt. Then we wrote this introduction in our last lecture as well. So I'm just going to read it again and just review what the introduction says. However, if you're confused about why this is the introduction, what the parts of it are, anything like that, we do go over that in detail in the last lecture. So be sure to check that out if that is something that is confusing, because I won't go over it here. Here I'm going to assume that you've already watched the last lecture or attended the last lecture and that you're good to move on to body paragraphs and conclusion today. Okay, so I'll read it one last time just to remind ourselves what our introduction said. So, our introduction says, in recent years, more and more young adults are living with their parents as opposed to moving out and finding their own place. There are advantages and disadvantages to this phenomenon. On one hand, this can allow young adults to pursue higher education without going into as much debt. But on the other hand, it can prevent some young adults from learning adult responsibilities. I think that it is a good thing for young adults to continue living with their parents if they are pursuing higher education and learning adult responsibilities, but that it is a bad thing for young adults who are not doing anything productive while living at home. So there we go. So in the introduction, what did we do? We paraphrased the question, then gave our opinion. Then we also talked about, we briefly talked about the two reasons, right? And so our reason one for our first paragraph is going to be the advantage, which is going to talk about how young adults can pursue higher education. So we're going to go into more detail and discuss why is that the case, right? Why is it the case that a young adult who lives at home it has better access to higher education than a young adult who doesn't, right? And then for our second body paragraph, we'll go over the second reason, which is that living at home can prevent some young adults from learning adult responsibilities. Well, why is that the case? Why would that be the case sometimes, right? We have to discuss that. And then we have to always connect everything back to the thesis, and thesis is an orange, okay? So we have to connect it back to feeling that it's a good thing in some cases, right? If we're pursuing higher education and learning adult responsibilities, but not good if we're not doing anything productive, right? So we have to connect it back to that main thesis, that main point, okay? All right, so let's go ahead and move on to paragraph one and paragraph two. So the first part in the darkest blue is to give our reason. Okay, so this is pretty much just a repeat of our reason from the introduction, right? Our introduction is going to be the basis of these body paragraphs and of the conclusion. It's going to set the tone for the entire essay. So we already know what it is. We just kind of have to copy it down in different wording. So I say one advantage of young adults living at home for free is that they can pursue higher education more easily. Good. So we stated it. Awesome. Then part two in the second darkest blue is to expand on your reason. So let's explain a little bit further. Well, why would that be? Why would it be that young adults living at home makes them able to pursue higher education more easily? Let's explain. Well, it does explain, it says post secondary education already costs a lot of money. So living at home gives young people the opportunity to put the money that they have towards higher education rather than rent. So there you go. There you go. If they're living at home, not paying rent there, they can put their paychecks mostly towards their tuition fees instead of the money they're making going towards paying rent, and so then there's less left there for them to go pursue higher education. They don't have as much money, so then they end up going into debt, end up doing those things. We don't have to go into that great detail, but this basically it does give kind of that explanation there of, oh, here's why, here's how living at home for free helps people pursue higher education, because without that explanation it might confuse some people. It's like, oh, well, what difference does it make? You can pursue higher education whether you live at home or not. And while that's true, there's only so much money that most people make, right? Most people live on a fixed income. So this makes more sense now. Then it says given examples. Let's give an example specifically to talk about how the students could put that money towards higher education. So it says here next, if someone who is going to university full time makes $25 an hour and works 20 hours per week, that's about $2,000 gross income, which is enough to pay for school tuition fees, which cost about $10,000 to $15,000 per year in net income. So there we go. Basically, we're explaining how if students work those 20 hours at that hourly rate, they're able to pay for their university, right? They're able to pay for it then if they're not also having to pay for other things out of that income. Now, one other thing I want to address here is there's some language here, there's some vocabulary words that might not be familiar to everyone I want to discuss. Here I use the term gross income. What is gross income? Gross income is income made or money made before taxes, right? Because if we just multiply 25 times 20 times 4, right? For 4 weeks in a month approximately, that's $2,000. However, that's the amount we would get before taxes, right? Whereas later here I say $10,000 to $15,000 a year net income, right? Because the money we pay towards school tuition, that has to be after tax dollars. We have to pay our taxes first, and then we get however much is left to keep, and we get to do whatever we want with that money, including put some towards our higher education, right? So it costs $10,000 to $15,000 a year in net income, right? In income after we paid our taxes and any other fees like employment insurance, etc. Okay, so if you're not familiar with terms like gross income and net income, I hope that helped because oftentimes on the IELTS, at some point, whether it's in the writing task, whether it's in a different task, money will come up as a topic. It's a popular subject, so I do encourage you that if you're not that familiar with business English terms or terms that have to do with money and taxes and things like that, to familiarize yourself with those things would be a good suggestion because that vocabulary will absolutely help you and come in handy, right? Now, let's say you didn't know the word for gross income. You could just say income before taxes and income after taxes, and then that would be fine too. However, saying gross income and net income is slightly stronger than that in the eyes of the IELTS examiners because they're looking at it and realizing you have specific terms that are related to this topic rather than rather than just the literal meaninged phrases. Now, that said, literal meaning phrases are fine too. You'll do fine, but it's slightly stronger to have that specific vocabulary there. So I do encourage it. Awesome. So there we go. But long story short, with that, I went on a bit of a tangent about some vocabulary words I use there. But long story short, this is me giving an example, right? This is me giving an example as to how someone who is pursuing post secondary education can put their money towards their school tuition, and therefore not and since they're not paying rent, it's easier for them to do that, right? So I'm giving an example of, well, why is it easier for a young adult living at home to go pursue higher education? Then we need to connect the example to our reason, right? So how does that example relate to my reason from earlier, where that living at home helps us pursue higher education more easily? Well, it says that said, it is not enough money to also rent a small apartment, and full time students do not usually have time to work more than 20 hours during the school year, so living at home benefits young adults. So there we go. So there we go. We explained it. We explained how, yes, we have enough money to pay for the school tuition. But the students don't also have enough money to pay rent as well, right? So they can't, it's not like they could just do both and have just as easy a time paying for their higher education if they're also having to pay their rent, right? It also discusses, well, how come that example is a realistic example, right? Why can't a student just work more than 20 hours a week, right? Because 20 hours a week to anyone working full time, that doesn't seem like a lot, right? Why are they only working 20 hours? Well, if you're pursuing full time school, that full time school, let me tell you, is going to be at least 40 hours a week right there. So even as a student working 20 hours a week that was a full load for me for sure, absolutely. And it is for most people, right? So since these students are spending a lot of time working hard at their school, they don't have as much time to spend working, which is fine, right? That makes sense. So we explained it, right? We explained how does that example relate to post-secondary students living at home. Then, last but not least, we need to connect our example back to the thesis. So, what was the thesis again? It's basically that it's a good thing for young adults. It benefits them to continue living with parents if they're pursuing higher education. That's the part of our thesis we're going to connect to here. So, we're going to say by staying home, young people are able to pay for school without going into student debt if they spend their income wisely, right? So, they have an opportunity here, if they're wise with their income, to do that, right? In this case, whereas they might not have that opportunity to do that as easily or at all if they don't live at home, right? And I'm not going to say it's impossible to, or that, because there's people I know who've done it, but it's certainly a lot harder, right? It gives more of an opportunity for them here. Also, notice I kind of transitioned into the next paragraph, which goes into the disadvantages, because I said I ended it with if they spend their income wisely, right? That kind of leads us into the next part of, well, what if they don't spend their income wisely? What if they don't make wise decisions? Then, in that case, young adults living at home could be more of a hindrance than a help, right? It could hinder their ability to grow up, basically, and that's a problem. And we talk more about that in the next one. So I'm using that last little bit as kind of a transition to the next paragraph of if they spend their income wisely, right? Because if a student works all these hours but then doesn't spend the income wisely and doesn't use it towards their tuition, well, then maybe they're in just as much debt or even more debt than they would be in otherwise if they moved out. So it is important that they actually do put that income towards they do put that income towards their education. Then that's the only way this actually works and they actually get the benefit that the parents are probably intending. Okay, so that's body paragraph number 1. Let's move on to body paragraph 2. So let's go back to our introduction and let's remind ourselves, okay, for body paragraph 2, we're going to be discussing in detail our second reason. So what was the second reason? Well, the second reason in the advantage disadvantage essay is the disadvantage. So, what was the disadvantage again? The disadvantage is that it can prevent some young adults from learning adult responsibilities, right? So that's going to be our very first sentence: is give our reason. It stops adults from learning adult responsibilities. So here we go. A disadvantage of young people staying at home is that they might not learn adult responsibilities. Well, I think my face is covering the not, but it does say not there and not no. So I just wanted to be clear there. But yeah, there we go. There it is. So there we go. We stated our reason. Now, the next part is we have to expand on our reason. So let's explain, right? Let's explain further. Well, why is that the case? Why would people staying at home mean that they might not learn adult responsibilities? It says it is important for young adults to not only learn in school, but also learn how to budget, buy groceries, cook, clean, and pay bills. Right? So that goes further into detail that, oh wait, if they're living at home, maybe they're not doing those things. If we're not living at home, they perhaps are doing those things. Then it goes into an example. So oftentimes, parents will take care of those responsibilities, which means young adults who live at home are not learning them, right? So this is kind of going back to the main point of suggesting that, oh, wait, maybe the young adults aren't learning these key skills and learning these key adult responsibilities that we explained earlier if they're just living at home. Whereas if we're not living at home, then if we don't cook for ourselves and buy groceries, we're going to starve. If we don't balance our budget, we're going to be in real trouble. We're not going to be able to keep living where we're living, right? So there's a lot more at stake, right? Which can, in some cases, cause people to make smarter decisions because they know that more is at stake, right? Potentially. Then we have to do connecting our example to our reason, right? So let's connect that example we just gave of parents taking care of those responsibilities to our reason that young people staying at home isn't going to help them learn adult responsibilities. So it says, this puts young adults who live at home at a disadvantage in the case that they do not end up learning adult responsibilities and independence, right? So, long story short, they're not learning these things because their parents are taking care of that, is what it's saying. So, they're at a disadvantage. And then last but not least, we have to connect it to our thesis. So our thesis again was that it's a good thing if for students who are pursuing higher education and pursuing adult responsibilities as well, but it's bad when young adults just live at home and don't do anything productive for a lot of years. That's not very good, right? So it says here, that said, if parents make it a requirement for a young adult to learn how to budget, cook some of the meals, and complete their fair share of the cleaning, this disadvantage would not apply to them as much, right? So there might be some things, right, that they're still missing, right, like paying the bills, for instance, but if they can still learn a lot of adult responsibilities whilst living at home, right? They can still learn those things if parents make it a requirement for those adults. So we're connecting it back to the thesis of this disadvantage wouldn't apply as much if they're still learning those responsibilities anyway. If the parents are saying, we're also gonna teach you how to do these other adult responsibilities whilst you're living at home, so that when you do eventually move out, you're gonna be okay. You're not going to have no idea how to do anything at all other than what you learned at school, right? And so there we go. We connected it back to that thesis. So there we go. Okay, so those were the two body paragraphs for this introduction. We're also going to make a conclusion for this essay after, but before we do that, I want to get everyone really versed with the whole example. This whole example structure is really important, so we're going to be doing that. Okay, so here's number two. I actually don't think I did number three, but I wanted to do two examples of paragraph 1 and 2, and also two conclusions. I think was the main reason I went with two here. So let's go back to two and remind ourselves what this one was about. This one says some politicians believe that nonviolent criminals should be made to do community service work instead of going to jail. To what extent do you agree or disagree? And here was my introduction so far. I said in recent years there have been more discussions about the criminal justice system and whether nonviolent criminals should go to jail or be given community service. I believe that nonviolent criminals should be given community service rather than jail time. This is because community service has a positive impact on our community, whereas it is costly to put more people in jail. Also, since these criminals are not violent, there is not much risk to society of keeping them out of jail. Overall, it is better for society to sentence nonviolent criminals to community service hours rather than jail time. Okay, so the main two things we need to bring into our main body paragraphs are number one, the blue part, right, which is our reasons, because those two reasons are going to be restated as the first sentence and as the topic sentence of each of our body paragraphs. And then also, we need to connect all of our points back to our thesis. So we need to show in our body paragraphs that some way that it is better for society, in our opinion, for nonviolent criminals to get community service rather than jail time. We have to connect our arguments back to that main point. Okay, so let's do that. The first thing we need to do as a reminder is to give our reason, right? So let's give our reason. Well, our first reason, according to this blue part here, is that community service has a positive impact on our community, whereas it's more costly to put people in jail. So it says here, first of all, community service has a positive impact on our society. Okay. Then we have to go into more detail. Well, why is that? How come community service impacts our society positively? How do we know that? So let's go into more detail. It says when people engage in community service hours as their punishment, they are doing something to actually help the community and make up for their crime. Whereas sentencing people to jail only costs the community taxpayers money without giving them anything in return. Right? So here we're explaining how, wait, if people go do community service, that's actually working hours that they're putting back into the community that they committed a crime in. If we just put them in jail, well, whether someone's in jail or not in jail, that doesn't affect that doesn't impact the community positively, really. It doesn't make a difference to us. It doesn't really make up for the crime necessarily. It doesn't do anything good for the community that this person took from by committing their crime. So we explain that, so that's good. Then we need to give an example, right? Let's give an example of a certain community service activity that's common perhaps, and explain how that would actually help society. For example, if the punishment for committing petty theft is jail time, that doesn't benefit people in society. But if the punishment is that the criminal must spend 100 hours helping the homeless shelter, then that benefits the people at the shelter and therefore the rest of society. So this sentence kind of goes over too, right? It first of all gives an example, right? It gives an example of what's an example of a community service activity. The example I gave was 100 hours of helping at the homeless shelter. And then we also connected back to our reason as well by saying that, that benefits the people at the shelter and therefore the rest of our society, right? That goes back to our main argument that community service has a positive impact on our society. So we connected it back to our topic sentence, we connected it back to our original reason. And then we must now give an overall, conclusion sentence here. that connects back to the thesis. It says here, the overall impact of sentencing people to community service rather than jail time is better, right? So we're connecting it back to it just impacts our society better um, by giving people community service. Okay, so there we go. There is our paragraph 1 all done. Okay, so for paragraph 2, I'm going to go back to the blue part and I'm going to look at what did I say for the second reason why I believe that nonviolent criminals should be given community service rather than jail time. So what did I say here? I said, also, since these criminals are not violent, there is not too much risk to society of keeping them out of jail. Okay, so now I need to rephrase that as my very first sentence for body paragraph 2. I said the second reason is that since these are non-violent criminals, there is not much risk to keeping them out of prison. And now next part is I need to further explain that point. So how come? How come it doesn't really put us at risk to keep non-violent criminals out of jail? Um, but would it otherwise? Perhaps. It says the spaces that we do the spaces that we do have in jails and prisons should be kept available for people who need to be there because they would be violent towards people in the society otherwise. So here kind of going into more detail and explaining basically that those spaces should be kept for people who are actually violent, right? People who are violent who would hurt others. Whereas, keeping other people, the nonviolent criminals, out doesn't really hurt anyone, right? For example, so, now they're going into the example. If we decide that people must be sentenced to jail for every crime, even small crimes like smoking marijuana and petty theft, then there might not be enough jail space left for a violent offender, right? So they're giving an example of, let's say we're just putting everyone in jail left and right for anything, pretty much. Then what happens when there's a violent offender in town and it's like, uh-oh, we don't have any jail space for them. Well, what will we do, right? Because there's only limited space in jails. Now we could build more jails. That's a possibility too. However, we're not just going to build a jail instantly. It's going to take the construction workers a long time to build a new jail, right? If that's even the best if that's even the best solution that we want to actually implement, which that's another whole discussion, right? But there we go. We might not have enough jail spaces left if people are going to jail even for small crimes that don't really harm society that much, right? I mean, you could argue that smoking marijuana is bad or petty theft is bad, totally fine, but those aren't going to affect society as bad as violent offenders, right? So there we go. So we gave an example of how it could be harmful if we don't, if we put people in jail for petty crimes. Then, actually, in this case, we have the light blue color, but the lightest blue before the slightly darker blue here, and that's because I actually connected back to our thesis before I connected back to our point, and that's fine too. So, what I did here is I said, therefore, keeping nonviolent offenders out of jail is better for society, right? So, connecting back to our thesis, and then I explained how it connects to our reason as well, because it will ensure that there is enough space for dangerous criminals to be in jail so that they are unable to physically hurt other people, right? So there we go, connected back to our thesis and our reason in that same sentence there. So there we go. All right, so that is it for the body paragraphs. I guess we technically got 4 examples of body paragraphs because we did paragraph 1 and 2 for each example. I do also want to give at least 2 examples for conclusion. But before I do that, I want to talk about what is a conclusion and also what are the 3 things we must include in the conclusion. The conclusion is usually the shortest and it's also probably the easiest because in a conclusion, the whole purpose is to just summarize what the essay was about. Do not introduce any new information in your conclusion. If there's new information that you feel is relevant, you want to discuss, figure out how to implement it in your body paragraphs and your introduction. Do not add new information to your conclusion. That's not correct. Okay. So, what do we do in a conclusion? Number 1 is we summarize the main points, right? What are the key takeaway points that you would want someone who's reading your work to take away? The second one is provide a call to action. And what I mean by that, what do I mean by provide a call to action? I mean basically provide like a something that people reading this this essay can do if they're in that position, right? So, for example, a call to action for the first paragraph might be about, hey, parents out there, if you're a parent out there of a young adult, make sure that it is. I do think it's a good idea to let your university student, your young adult child, stay home and not pay rent. So long as you're also teaching them adult responsibilities, right? It could be suggesting to the parent that that's something they should do, right? So that could be your conclusion, right? Your call to action for that, right? Or for the second one, the call to action could be something more like, oh, hang on. There we go. Okay, my apologies for that. But yeah, basically the second call to action for like this for the second one here, which was about nonviolent criminals. It could be a call to action for lawmakers, for politicians, for people in those positions of power to really consider those things when it comes to making decisions, right? Because at the end of the day, the police, they're following what the government tells them to do, right? The police are working for the government essentially. They need to follow what the government tells them to do. So a call to action, not necessarily to police themselves, but to politicians and to lawmakers, could be, who we're talking to here, to actually consider those things, right? And there's certainly politicians who do feel that way, or maybe politicians who feel the other way. Perhaps the call to action is mostly to politicians who don't feel the way you feel, right? Politicians who would disagree with you, to kind of see it from your point of view, as opposed to just talking to politicians who do agree with you already, right? But long story short, call to action is basically, what do you want someone reading this, the target audience reading this perhaps, to take away from your essay, right? What's the point of your essay? And then last but not least is restate your thesis. Now you can use different wording to restate your thesis, but essentially you're just restating the same thing, right? So the reason that the conclusion should be the easiest part is partly because it's the shortest, right? There's only three things we have to really do here, is number one reason. And number two reason is there's only really one new thing to do. We have to come up with a call to action, right? Decide who is this essay really for, other than the examiners, obviously. Obviously, it's really just for them. But, who could this benefit, right? Who could your opinion benefit perhaps? And what would you want them to do, right? That's kind of the only new thing. Summarizing the main points we already did in the introduction, so we just have to kind of do the same thing again with slightly different wording. And same with restate your thesis. Well, you already made your thesis in your introduction. We just kind of have to rephrase it for your conclusion, and that's it. So that's why conclusion isn't really so hard, because there's really only three things you have to do, and two of them are really just rewording things that you already did earlier on, right? There's only really one new thing, right? Okay. So let's move on to the example. So here is sample essay one. This is the essay. So here's the introduction and the two body paragraphs that are about young adults living at home. Okay. So just a reminder, what do we have to do for a conclusion? First, we have to summarize the main points. So what were the main points? Well, the main points were basically that there's advantages and disadvantages to young adults living at home, right? That was kind of the one main point I can think of. And so here I wrote, there are advantages and disadvantages for young adults who live at home. Young adults can benefit from living at home as long as they are budgeting properly by putting most of their income into education, savings, and investments rather than discretionary spending, right? So that was the main point there, right? And then the second one is provide a call to action, right? So who could this essay benefit? It says here, it's important for parents to teach their young adults responsibilities and have standards for them if they are going to be living at home, right? So there you go, right? There we go. There's a call to action for parents. So someone reading this, who is a parent of a young adult or a parent of a teenager who will be a young adult soon, might read this and think, oh yeah, that's something I should do perhaps. Perhaps I should consider what responsibilities my student should have, right? If they're going to be living at home, right? It also could, another call to action we could potentially put here instead is this could be speaking to parents who don't think their children should be living at home, who feel their children should be living outside the home, right? Now, I chose this call to action specifically because I think that the opposite problem in today's day and age is more common of young adults not knowing how to do things because parents they love their kids so much, which is great, but sometimes to a fault, unfortunately. I think that's more of a issue today. However, you could also put the other call to action of speaking to parents who maybe don't think their kids would benefit from living at home, right? We could point out that, oh, as long as they learn adult responsibilities, they could really benefit from this and have more access to higher education. And if higher education is something that that parent values, then that could change their mind, that could change their perspective, right? So that's another potential call to action I could put here. Now, I put this one, but you could put a different call to action specifically, maybe talk to parents. Maybe you're talking to parents who don't think there are advantages and, state that those advantages to convince them that it is a good idea and perhaps you think it should be an option for their child to be able to do. It might change their mind about that potentially, right? And then the last one is to restate the thesis. So, what was the thesis? The thesis is the orange part, and it says, I think that it is a good idea or a good thing for young adults to continue living with their parents if they're pursuing higher education and learning adult responsibilities, but that it is a bad thing for young adults who are not doing anything productive while living at home. So, I need to take that, and I'm not going to just copy paste it. I'm going to restate it in a different way, but I'm going to essentially say the same thing again. I said that's why it's a good idea for adults to continue living with their parents if they are pursuing higher education and taking on household responsibilities, but it is not a good idea if young adults are not doing anything productive. Right? So there we go. That is slightly different than before, but it's essentially saying the same thing. Okay, so let's move on to conclusion number 2 in sample essay 2. So this is the same essay as before, where we have our introduction, our 2 body paragraphs, and we're about to write a conclusion. And just a reminder, this is the one about where I argue that it's better to put nonviolent criminals to give them community service hours rather than putting them in jail, right? Is the argument here. So that's what the essay is about. So, what's the first thing we do in our conclusion? We summarize the main points. So, what were the main points in this essay? The main points were basically that there's more benefits to our society by giving people community service who are nonviolent offenders rather than giving them jail time. So, let's see what I said. I said giving nonviolent criminals community service rather than jail time involves saving the limited space available in jail for violent criminals so they'll not have the ability to hurt people and allows us all to benefit from the community service work completed by nonviolent offenders. So there we go. So that's a nice summary of what was the essay about without going into tons of detail, right? Because this is a conclusion, this is not the main body paragraph. And then what's our next thing we need to do? We need to provide a call to action. So who are we talking to, right? Who could benefit from hearing this message the most? Well, probably politicians or lawmakers, someone like that, right? Because the everyday citizen or the everyday parent here doesn't get to make that call. The politicians get to make that call, right? Perhaps we could be speaking to other people as well, right? In terms of who you're voting for or things like that. You could make that argument too, to that people out there should vote for politicians who will take that into account. But really, who we're mainly talking to is the politicians themselves, right? So I say for those reasons, it's important for politicians to take the benefits to our society into account when deciding which type of sentencing is most appropriate, right? Because some politicians they want to be tough on crime, they want to be harsh, they want to teach people a lesson, and okay, great, but is there a way to teach people a lesson that doesn't impact the rest of our society badly, right? They could teach them that lesson and even though, yeah, it's a bit less harsh, it's going to benefit our society overall, right? There are more important things than being tough on crime, right? Perhaps, like for example, considering the impacts it has on the law-abiding citizens, on the people who, hopefully you want their vote if you're a politician. I mean, I think that's what all politicians want, right? They want your vote. So there you go. So maybe that's the type of politician who you are, because there's many politicians with many opinions out there, right? But who are you mainly talking to? You're mainly talking to the politicians who might not agree with this, who might think, oh, no, no, even if you have a petty crime, you got to go to jail. We've got to get as many people in jail as possible. Well, this is arguing against that. This is arguing that no, perhaps other punishments are going to be better for our society, for example. Okay. And then last but not least, we need to restate our thesis. So, what was our thesis again? Well, the thesis is in orange. It says, overall, it is better for society to sentence nonviolent criminals to community service rather than jail time, right? So, I restate that and I say, thus, society would benefit from nonviolent criminals being sentenced to community service work rather than jail time. And so, there we go. All right, so that is it for today. So the goal of today was now you can write body paragraphs and conclusion sentences. You can also write introductions, but that was technically from last day, so I didn't include it here. And last but not least, before we go, I want to talk a bit more about the grading. I did discuss this a little bit last day. I want to discuss the grading here. So the source, by the way, is the IELTS.org website, the IELTS.org website, and so if you do want to read more about that, you can go there. But this is directly taken from their website. I'm just going to kind of summarize it here and talk about it here. So it says that in both the IELTS academic and IELTS general training versions, task 2 requires test takers to formulate and develop a position in relation to a given prompt in the form of a question or statement, right? So that we knew, right? We went over some examples of that. Ideas should be supported by evidence and examples. May be drawn from the test taker's own experience. So there we go, right? We talked about that too. We gave examples, we gave evidence, right? We talked about the structure as well and where to give examples and evidence. Responses must be at least 250 words in length. Scripts under the minimum required word count will be penalized. So if we go back and do a word count, I already did for these, but all of these are each sample essay with the conclusion as well is over that 250 word threshold, and so we're good to go here. But do make sure that your essay is at least 250 words. That is important because they will penalize you if you do not. So they will take marks away if you don't do that. So that's the first thing is long story short for task response, they want you to basically use 250 words, number one. And number two, make sure that you support your ideas with evidence and examples. Okay, so those are the two things to get the marks for task response. The next thing it says is coherence and cohesion. It says this assesses the overall clarity and fluency of the message, so how the response organizes and links information, ideas, and language. Coherence refers to the linking of ideas through logical sequencing. Cohesion refers to the varied and appropriate use of cohesive devices like logical connectors, pronouns, and conjunctions to assist in making contextual and referential relationships between the and within sentences clear. So we did talk about that. We talked mostly about coherence as opposed to cohesion, right? Because I specifically gave examples of, okay, we want for conclusion, we want this, this, this. For body paragraphs, we want these 5 things in this order, right? Or in approximately this order, right? We did talk a little bit about cohesion, right? Using logical connectors like therefore or and, but, because, all those kinds of things. We did use those as well. We didn't talk in as much detail about using those, but those are something that should be used for sure to be clear. Then we talk about lexical resource, and we did talk a bit about this today as well. And that's basically using a good range of vocabulary that's accurate and appropriate to the specific tasks, right? So we talked about with this one, it's just good in general to have a wide range of vocabulary and then to use that vocabulary that you have for relevance. So I'm going to go back actually and give some examples of how we did that. So I talked a bit about gross income and net income in this one, right? In the body paragraph here for sample essay 1 and what those mean and how that's relevant because our entire argument is basically, or at least part of our argument is about how students can are able to afford their tuition easier if they live at home, right? Rather than not living at home. So that's the whole argument there. For this one here, for the community service versus jail time, I use words like sentence to community service, sentence to jail time, nonviolent criminals, right? Or I sometimes use offenders instead of criminals, right? So I don't just use the same wording all the time. I use common language that we would use when we're talking about the criminal justice system, right? I also one thing it too is it in the original prompt it never said criminal justice system. I said criminal justice system here, right? That's a phrase I decided to use because that was a relevant phrase to use, right? So any relevant phrases that phrases or words that are going to make sense, that are appropriate and that are relevant, absolutely use those, right? Rather than just using the exact wording that they use the entire time, use some different wording, but also don't just use random wording, right? Make sure that the wording you're using is relevant and is appropriate, because if it isn't, then you're not going to actually win any points for that. Right, so that's important, and that is something we discussed a little bit today. The last one is kind of the only one that we didn't really discuss at all today specifically, but it's kind of just a given anytime you're writing anything, and it's pretty universal, whether you're writing the IELTS core, the IELTS test, or you're writing a different test, or you're writing a paragraph or an email or whatever it is. Make sure that your grammar is accurate, right? So making sure that you're putting commas and periods and capitalization and everything else in between in the correct place. I did do that throughout, but I didn't really discuss, oh, well, how can we put a comma there, or how can we put a period there, or things like that. That I didn't really go into much detail about. I go into more detail about the grammar parts specifically that are going to be helpful for the IELTS course in the grammar section, right? So if that is something of interest to you, be sure to take a look at that section as well. But yeah, that is going to be it for me then. I hope you learned a lot from this. I really do. And I wish you the best of luck on your IELTS test. Make sure that if you haven't already, you can sign up for getting a sample question and try this yourself. I'm happy to give you feedback. That is what I'm here to do. And so make sure that you do go ahead and send me that, and I'll get that back to you as soon as possible as well. But yeah, best of luck writing your test, your writing task for the IELTS test. And I will see everyone next day. Bye, everyone.